In the winter of 2021, I moved into a small rental house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't anything special, a single-story home with an unfinished basement, but it was cheap, and the landlord didn't ask too many questions, which suited me fine. I was starting fresh after a rough year, and the quiet neighborhood seemed like the perfect place to reset my life. The house had a strange layout, though. The basement, which I initially planned to use for storage, could only be accessed through a heavy wooden door in the kitchen. The door had an old brass latch that clicked loudly every time you opened or closed it, and the stairs leading down were steep and narrow, lit by a single exposed bulb. The basement itself was cold, damp, and smelled faintly of mildew, with concrete floors and stone walls that looked like they belonged in a century-old cellar. I told myself I wouldn't need to go down there often, but that basement quickly became the center of my nightmares. It started about a week after I moved in. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a faint noise coming from the kitchen, a low, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought it was the pipes. The house was old, and I'd noticed the plumbing made strange noises when the temperature dropped. But when I walked into the kitchen to check, the sound stopped. I stood there for a moment, staring at the basement door. For some reason, I felt drawn to it, like something on the other side was waiting for me to open it. My skin prickled, and I shook off the thought, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. I went to bed and convinced myself it was nothing. The tapping came back the next night. This time, it was louder, more deliberate, and impossible to ignore. It sounded like someone was knocking slow, heavy thuds against the wooden door. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the door. My heart was racing as I unlatched it and shined the light down the stairs. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. Nothing. The basement was empty, just as I'd left it. But as I stood there, the air grew colder, and I swear I heard something, a faint whisper, so quiet I couldn't make out the words. The sound seemed to come from deep in the shadows. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and went back to my bedroom. That night, I barely slept. The next few nights were worse. The tapping became a constant presence, and I started hearing other noises, two scratching sounds, like nails dragging across wood, and a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. I began to dread the nights, lying in bed with my heart pounding, waiting for the noises to start. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of something heavy moving across the floor in the kitchen. It sounded like furniture being dragged, but I knew I was alone in the house. My blood ran cold as I realized the noise was coming from the direction of the basement door. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, creeping out of my room and into the hallway. The kitchen was dark except for the faint glow from the streetlights outside. At first, I didn't see anything unusual until my eyes fell on the basement door. It was open. The heavy wooden door, which I always made sure to lock, was standing ajar, and the latch was swinging back and forth, clicking softly. I wanted to run, to get out of the house and never come back, but something compelled me to move closer. My flashlight beam trembled as I aimed it down the basement stairs. At first, all I saw was darkness, but then, near the bottom of the stairs, I noticed a shape, an impossibly tall shadow standing perfectly still. It wasn't a person. It couldn't have been. It was too large, its form too distorted, like it wasn't constrained by the natural proportions of a human body. As I stared, the shadow seemed to ripple, as if it were alive. Then, two pinpricks of light appeared in the darkness, eyes glowing faintly red. A voice followed, deep and raspy, like the crackle of a dying fire. "You shouldn't be here." The words sent a jolt of terror through me. I stumbled backward, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands were shaking so badly, could barely hold the latch in place. For the rest of the night, I sat on the couch with every light in the house turned on, clutching a kitchen knife and praying for dawn. The next day, I called the landlord and told him I wanted out of the lease. He was reluctant, but eventually agreed after I offered to pay a termination fee. I didn't tell him why I wanted to leave, but as I was packing my things, he let something slip. "You know, you're not the first tenant to leave early," he said, almost offhandedly. "People always complain about the basement. Some say it's haunted, but I don't believe in that stuff." I didn't respond. I just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. A week later, I moved into a new apartment on the other side of town. It was small and overpriced, but it felt safe. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been in that basement hadn't stayed behind. At night, I sometimes hear faint tapping sounds too soft to be real, but just loud enough to make me wonder. I don't know what I saw that night, but I'll never forget the way it felt, the suffocating cold, the unshakable sense of dread, and those glowing red eyes staring back at me from the darkness. I've tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I know the truth. Some things aren't meant to be explained, and some doors should never be opened.